will be borne for any type of goods that will be brought into the land crossing the custom frontiers of US, bringing into the land of US. Second would be the type of duty that would be country specific. And for the time being, as we speak, and as we all know, it's widely publicized everywhere. The markets have reacted to it. There is a 90-day pause, barring few exceptions, one being China. So why this came into play? The goal is simpler. US feel that their trade deficit is what is responsible for bringing into this reciprocity in the tariff. Trade deficit is nothing but a numerical calculation wherein the imports are more as compared to the exports made by the country, and this is what they feel that the trade deficit is hampering their domestic manufacturers, and therefore this reciprocity in tariff is what can bring in the balance of trade in their favor. As I have already told you, reason behind it is the deficit. US currently is facing $1.2 trillion deficit, and their manufacturing index is shrinking, resulting into the job losses, factory closure, and over dependency on the imports. And as and this is actually a fact that when we see the import tariff levied by US as compared to the other countries, specifically since we are concerned with India. So the tariff rate for India, for example, with respect to the car import, is 70% when US goods are being exported from US to India. India charges 70% of tariff on those goods, specifically import of cars. And when the same is exported from India to US, means when US is importing from India, the rate of duty or the customs duty in particular case is 2.5%. So there is a stark difference. Now, what would be the impact of this executive order? It is imposed, as I told you, there is a flat 10% additional tariff which has been imposed on all import of all goods, irrespective of the countries, irrespective of its origin. Second being the country specific additional tariff, which is part of Annexure 1, and all the maximum countries are being covered over there, and the rates again differs on the calculation which US has provided. To the extent of the reciprocity of tariff that is imposed is based on the damage that is being caused to a particular country. Now the part of the imported product not made in US will not face this reciprocal tariff. To explain you with an illustration, for example, if India is importing a component for manufacturing the vehicles, let's say some auto parts are imported from US in India. Using those auto parts, the finished goods, which is a car, is manufactured and exported to US. In that case, to the extent the component of US has gone into the manufacturing of finished goods, that component will not suffer this duty of reciprocal tariff. I hope I'm clear to this. If any questions, we can take it up later on. Now, therefore, this third point, which we discussed just now, also involves a lot of documentation submission, a lot of interaction with the US Customs Authority, and lot of proving the case for yourself that what has gone into and what is the extent and value of it that has gone into the finished goods, so that it doesn't suffer the reciprocal tariff in the land of US. And this tariff would be in a form of ad valorem, which simply means that whatever will be the transaction value that will be declared, on that value, this ad valorem tariff will be applicable. Unlike other sort of tariffs, which is a fixed rate wherein a certain particular amount, a minimum import price is decided or a minimum rate of duty is decided, those are called as a fixed tariff, which is not the case. These type of duty, reciprocal duty, would be on a ad valorem basis. The focal point, as we already discussed, is the reciprocity, and the rate is also decided basis this reciprocity, that the quantum of damage a particular country is doing on the import or the domestic manufacturers of US. The rate is dependent on the reciprocal tariff is dependent on that type of damage. We will come to it and see it in the further slides, that how this reciprocal tariffs are being arrived at by US. There are no exceptions generally applicable to all. However, certain bit which are being exempted are the defense material, pharma goods, and goods which are already in transit. This is very important to know, that while this new norm of tariff being imposed, or rather being forced to imposed by US on all the countries from April 5th, there was at given point in time. There on the high seas or they were in transit, and at that point in time there was no anticipation of this, or rather no impact of this executed order fathomed by the exporters to US. So those goods which are in transit would not be subjected to these type of reciprocal tariff, which means the goods which have left from the exporter's place and not into their warehouse and not gone into the process of consumption. I am using three different words here and each have its meaning. And if someone has gone through the executive order, would be able to appreciate that goods which are not into the consumption process, which means which is not into the manufacturing line or setup of the exporter to US, goods which are not into the warehouse, which means the ones which are manufactured, stocked, and ready to be exported to US, those are not exempted. Only the ones which have left the factory and are in transit are being exempted from this executive order. This is a snapshot of how the reciprocal tariff rate looks as compared to our neighboring countries. India being 26, China 84, Vietnam 46, Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, EU, so on and so forth. Though one on a lighter note, we see India at a very lesser rate. However, this also gives us a wake-up call that how much India is actually impacting the world trade and specifically the US trade. Being under a lower tariff, and if you have seen this tariff in comprehensiveness, someone just messaged me and said that we are even lesser than Pakistan. Pakistan has been subjected to tariff of 29%, which means the trade that US is doing with Pakistan, or rather the export of Pakistan to US, impactful to an amount of impactful export. Not in terms of numbers per se, but yes, the amount of damage that it is causing to US is more as compared to India. Therefore, the rate of tariff is 29% being imposed. However, it definitely gives India an edge as to buckle up and start making their manufacturing process and goods up to the international standards, where every country look forward to having those goods being imported from India. Now, how were these reciprocal tariffs being calculated, which we just now discussed? Screen, is my screen visible to everybody?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I get, okay, I'm getting few responses that yes, it is visible, but Okay, so I would continue. I would presume that it would be an individual problem and not specific to the presentation. Yeah, so we were on this part that how this reciprocal tariff is calculated. It is just a summation or a derivation of reciprocal tariff, which is based on couple of factors. One being how much import would drop in response to the price increase, and each country tariff rate is dependent on the size of its trade imbalance, as we spoke about a couple of minutes before, that the amount of imbalance the trade is causing to the bigger picture for US in their trade deficit is how the percentage has been arrived at. And US has given a clear formula as well to calculate this reciprocal tariff for each of its trading partner. And surprisingly, the rate for Pakistan is higher than India, which causes us more pain and bother. Now, where does the tariff exemption lies? These are few of the items where this reciprocal tariff will not be applicable. Articles which are covered by Section 50, example, postal items, personal baggages, donations, information material, goods which are already covered by Section 232 of trade expansion, the example being steel and aluminium items, goods from the sanctioned countries, naturally so because the trade with those sanctioned countries are barred to, I mean, the US trade in dollars are not allowed with respect to these sanctioned countries. United States, Mexico, Canada agreement compliant imports from Canada and Mexico are exempt, and non-USMCA compliant goods from Canada and Mexico remain under the previous tariffs are exempt. We'll come to the important point as to how the Indian diaspora can buckle up with respect to these specific tariff changes. I would want to shift my focus there, though we have covered certain bit of items which can be of use for industries. And just to quickly run you through that, how these tariff exemptions apply to the critical sectors, we have tried to list down certain chapter notes and chapter headings where it have its most of the impacts. However, we would like to quickly brush up through these that there are certain areas and certain sectors like essential mineral, metals, pharma, specific chemicals, semiconductors from reciprocal tariff, and these exemptions help to ensure uninterrupted access to these essential resources for US. So all these items which you are just now seeing on the screen, they are being exempted because they are critical sector for US. These are again a number data that India export to US has been to the extent of 80.79 billion as compared to the import, which is 43.06 billion. Out of that, the maximum share goes to the electronic exports, followed by gems and jewelry. Pharma, India is a big exporter of generic medicines. Machinery and instrument, mostly the parts and the accessories, spare parts and accessories are what India is exporting to US. Petroleum and the crude products, again the allied products and not the petroleum per se, but the allied products. Agri produce is something that hits India the most because this may be 6.5% of the share, but in terms of value, it contribute much to the Indian export. Ready-made garments, our biggest competitor here would be Bangladesh and Vietnam. Ready-made garment, textile product, ferrous and non-ferrous metals, transport equipment, inorganic, organic, and other agrochemicals account for 3.2%, so on and so forth. Now, these are again a few data which we would like to know the participants that India import $3.7 billion in electronics from US, with smartphones facing 16.5% duty, while 93% of India's electronic export to US is at zero tariff. So you can imagine the impact that these electronic sector would be facing now, henceforth, once if this reciprocal tariff is not being withdrawn after the expiry of pause of 90 days. The sectors that are most impacted would be pharma, energy, which are exempted, sorry. Gems and jewelry being the most impacted, with 30% of exports going to US, making them vulnerable to the demand impact. As most of my clients who are into gems and jewelry, and I'm being serving them since last decade or so. So each of the diamond ones have touched Surat and then being exported through Belgium route to US. So yes, gems and jewelry definitely gonna be a huge impact. Now there are certain talks being made that when you see the list, in that list annexure one, you will see that UAE, the import from UAE has now not being subjected to any reciprocal tariffs. So there are chances of having a shift in the supply chain as to how best and how in a proper way this supply chain mechanism can be altered or re-established to have minimum impact on these reciprocal tariffs, that shifting the or rather putting up a trading hub to a certain country or shifting the manufacturing hub from India to a certain country where the reciprocal tariffs would be least impacted. One example which we just now spoke about is Dubai. Other being the agri sector, which faces a steep tariff hike from 5% to 32%, and a 25% tariff on auto parts like engine, transmission, electric components, likely to see a steep rise in the cost for the Indian exporters. Now, what impact does India have with this? We already got a glimpse that Indian exporter would be struggling with terms of higher landed cost, making their product less competitive in the US market. Of course, the mathematics needs to be done as to how much percentage point does the reciprocal tariff results into in landed cost when compared to the peer Southeast Asian countries or the domestic manufacturers of US. And accordingly, they may have to rejig their landed price to their US customers. In terms of number, if we speak, the impact on the Indian economy is about to be in a range of 0.2 to 0.3% of the GDP, which is huge. Exporter could face stricter and more rigorous checks at the custom borders of US, because their product has to be proven. As I spoke just now, I gave you an example that of course there would be rejigging and realigning in terms of the supply chain. So there are contemplation and thought process going on to have the trading or business houses at a country where there is a least tariff impact. However, the issue of country of origin would be of a paramount importance, which would be taken up very seriously by the US Customs House to avoid these type of camouflaging, or I would say so that transaction where the goods are being circumvented through another country which is being faced with a lesser reciprocal tariff. So that would be of, therefore, more stricter and more deeper checks at the customs would be the new norms that Indian manufacturer and exporter would have to face. Yes, despite being this, the picture still have a faith and not so gloomy, because India is positioned well as compared to the other peers like China and Vietnam. And as we speak, we all know how China has put up their influence on the other neighboring countries, where most of the manufacturing is not only being shifted to the other Southeast Asian neighbors, be it Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, or any other Southeast Asian countries as we speak, Taiwan. But apart from that, they are so deep rooted that they are also planning to shift this entire supply chain at other locations where they are seeing this benefit of reciprocity. So, yes, China is way, way ahead. However, India does have a chance with respect to their gems and jewelry sector, electronic components, cheaper electronic components, auto parts, where they can still gain an edge. However, India does have a mile to cover as compared to China. With respect to the reciprocity of tariff, we do have a better advantage. However, with respect to the manufacturing setup and the supply chain mechanism, India really need to buckle up. Now, these are few of the ideas which we thought would be useful, or rather few of the areas where India should think on with respect to managing, or rather better equipping themselves in terms of the impact that these new US reciprocal tariff has. Now, the US customs have this concept of first sale rule. US does recognizes and knows that in terms of supply chain mechanism, there is a camouflage, which simply means that India, let's say, is having a better tariff relationship with UAE. UAE is coming up again and again because this has become the talk of the town, that now when where there exists no reciprocal tariff with UAE, can this be a good option of shifting the base or routing the goods through UAE channel? So yes, uh, illustratively, if we speak, let's say a good worth rupees 100 moves from India to Dubai, and thereafter at 120 it moves from Dubai to US. US does recognizes the first sale rule, which simply means that if you adopt the transaction value which the supply in the supply chain has suffered at the first leg, which means between India and Dubai, that would be considered as a good transaction value for the purposes of customs duty. So, first sale rule does become applicable. However, it becomes important to understand that how the manufacturer or the intermediary in between gets affected, how their margin gets affected. That needs to be definitely looked into. So yes, if a company which has a multi-tier international presence can definitely plan their supply chain better and equip themselves to have the least impact of this reciprocal tariff in their supply chain model, and therefore reducing their landed cost to US. The contractual reviews, company may have to they have to understand what all are the POs or the contracts that are open and would be subjected to this additional reciprocal tariff rates. They should determine their tariff cost and rework this entire pricing mechanism. One way to look into how we have all been equipped during the COVID times is the clause of force majeure that can be invoked to rework the pricing between India and the US parties, saying that it was something which was not anticipated or not known, and possibly on the ground of hardship, the rates can be revised at. So this is with qua or with respect to the existing or the open POs. With respect to the future contract, yes, this tariff calculation and tariff rates definitely needs to be clearly identifiable, and these changes, tariff changes, has to be account for into the POs or the contracts moving forward, which will have definitely a huge impact not only from the customs perspective but also from the transfer pricing perspective as well. Uh, Policy engagement. Business should support industry advocacy, bilateral dialogues, and US tariff may be reduced if trading partner addresses this imbalance or align with the US trade objectives. So there are this last point, policy engagement has enough RDX so as to say about it. Let's start from the last bit and move slowly to the first one. Align with the US trade objective. The trade objective of US is clearly spelled out that you reduce the trade imbalance between the two countries, and then we will be able to have the this reciprocal tariff being removed. Now, how we reduce these trade imbalances? One, India export less, or India reduces their tariff, or India start lowering their price. Indian exporters start lowering their price. The first and the third bit is something that is in the hands of multi-tier international business houses. That is to export less to US or reduce their price. The other bit is something that is in the hands of Indian government to reduce the trade or the tariff rates, which is something US would like to see in the future course of action. That's the reason this has been a wake up call, which US is trying to deal. And as we speak, we all know that US India foreign FTA, which is a preferential trade agreement or free trade agreement, is something that they are eyeing to sign. But again, these are the two dialogues which may two big wigs or two countries having a dialogue which may take quite a lot of time, and we never know that when they will be signing on those dotted lines. However, with respect to the tariff, can, or rather industry advocacy and bilateral trade dialogues, can this entire exercise be pushed to a court of law, which we just now at the start of the PPT discussed? Answer is yes, definitely. But it would require a mountain to be moved, wherein each of the component needs to be proved, saying that what impact it will have on the Indian manufacturers and how it will not impact negatively to the domestic manufacturing of US. So enough of number crunching and data that would be required to prove this case or prove the dispute resolution mechanism of World Trade Organization. Strategic supply chain change. We discussed about that international business houses can optimize their sourcing strategies by leveraging to the preferential duty benefits under the Indian Free Trade Agreement with their neighboring countries. India does enjoy FTA now with UAE. It does have a FTA with Japan as well and other nations where it needs to be analyzed that wherever the reciprocal tariff is less and India enjoy an FTA with those specific or respective countries, then they can align their supply chain to those countries and have their manufacturing done at those respective countries to enjoy the supply chain benefit under this reciprocal tariff change. Not only that, as we speak, we all know that the plate or the tectonic shift is happening so fast that one day we are hearing that this 90, there is a pause of 90 days. Other time we are hearing that there can be a dialogue or bilateral trade agreement between India and US. Some other time there is a news that there won't be any pause and there would be another increase between US and China. So it is a trade war or tariff war that is being going on, and this needs to be constantly monitored to see how the business gets impacted and whether their goods are being specifically covered into the exemption list or there is any revision to the tariff, so on and so forth. So this is ever changing landscape and needs to be closely monitored to assess the impact on the business houses. Definitely, in line of all this, there lies an opportunity for the Indian exporters to capitalize because, as we saw, the numbers, India is amongst one of the least impacted country with respect to the reciprocal tariff, being positioned at 26 percentage points. India does enjoy, or they do have, a competitive edge as opposed to their other players. However, there are definitely certain bits that India need to do right. One being augmenting their manufacturing setup, their supply chain distribution mechanism, so that they can best enjoy or optimize out of this entire chain of transaction which they do, and substantially or in the best way possible reduce their landed price and make their goods competitive as opposed to not only their South Asian counterparts, but competitive to the US domestic players as well. So from the content side, this is it from our side. We are open for the questions. Check the message board as well. Or if anyone interested to ask anything, they can please
Sir, I have a question to ask.
simply unmute themselves and ask a question. Yes, we will certainly share the PPT with the participants.
Good afternoon, sir. I have a question to ask. Okay, since US has put a pause on tariffs for 90 days, so can we expect in the next 3 months there will be like huge outflow of goods and services from the countries in which US import or export? Can we expect there will be more trade as usual, more than usual trade?
Any questions, participants?
Hello.
Ayush, we can't hear you. Just a second.
Hello.
Sorry. Yeah, Ayush, you are.
I think, sir, some Vinayak was trying to ask that,
Can you
because there
please
is a
repeat,
pause.
Ayush?
Sir, I think Vinayak was trying to ask that because there is a pause for this 90 days tariff, so can we expect some, exorbitant high rise in the, the exports that the people would, would be manufacturing and exporting, taking advantage of this 90-day period? And can we see like more transactions than usual? That is, I think, even I had that same query.
Okay. No, so sorry, Vinayak. Actually, my system was on mute, therefore I couldn't hear you. Yeah, so Vinayak and Ayush, the executive order as we read right now has given a deadline of 9th of April. Though there has been a pause, however, the goods, as we spoke, the goods which are lying in the warehouse or in the manufacturing setup or for the process of consumption for the manufacturing would be subjected to this reciprocity of the tariff. So this 90-day pause is only an interim measure. However, it doesn't impact, or rather, yes, the change can happen, but the planning cannot go with respect to the existing supply chain. Yes, there would be a steep rise in terms of the supplies being made, and people, or rather the industry, would like to fast track their supplies for this 90-day period. However, the underlying current remains the same, that the executive order has not been changed, and it says that 9th of April is the date from which this tariff comes into play. There is only a pause of 90 days. I hope I have been able to answer your question, Ayush and Vinayak.
So sir, like just a follow up on that. So when you say that there is a 90-day pause. So say, for
Right.
example, an Indian exporter having, an inventory and having regulars order from US. So can't he, prepone the orders to save that additional cost that at least, for the next few quarters. So can't we see that maybe some preponement having in this next 90 days in terms of
That
sales or the exports?
that Ayush, definitely from the exporter perspective, exporter would like to shift it. However, it all depends upon the trade relationship between the exporter and the importer, whether they are aligned to have, because ultimately the payment also needs to be made at their end, whether the credit lines or whether their financial augmentation is such that they can take this additional burden of supplies due to this change or the restrictive policies which has been introduced. So it all depends upon. However, as you from the legal perspective of it, definitely it can be done. However, it all depends upon the trade whether they are aligned to have this transaction done or no.
Got it, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, so there is one question on the meeting chat which has come. Vinayak, I think we
Yes, sir,
have
you
been
have
able.
answered the question. Thank you.
Okay, okay, okay. There, whether the pharma will not be subjected to 10%. No, pharma comes under the exemption list and therefore will not be subjected to the reciprocity of tariff. So yeah, in continuation to this, I take this opportunity to also say that this PPT and webinar we intend to do on interesting topics that the trade and industry suffers from. We definitely would like to also hear from you guys as to you want us to take up any specific issues. You can you have our email IDs, or you we will, once the PPT is being shared through a common email ID, you can share the topic that you would like us to take forward. Definitely, we would be interesting to hear it from the participants as well. The upcoming webinar that we intend to do is with respect to the uh, classification conundrum that the industry is going through. We are being bombarded with these queries and investigation day in day out for our clients that today DGGI has rated them or DRI has rated them or someone or the other agencies are at the doorstep of the clients, and definitely this is something which would be interesting to, I believe would be interesting to take up. More specifically, the heat is being faced by the auto uh, parts and accessory and ancillary products, where we are seeing that there is quite a huge number of spike in terms of investigation, and definitely there we are seeing a lot of trouble being faced by our industry members. So this is some, but however, being said that, when I say part and auto for specifically for the auto industry, it doesn't mean it only impacts auto. The funda or the rules of interpretation is equally applicable to any or every industry. So we would try to take that. Then the arrest provisions under GST and customs is something that we intend to take up uh, after this classification dispute. The issues where the subject, or rather a subject issue which can be approached through a writ court, what basically I believe as a You have always looked upon us as a advisor from a chartered accountancy and financial perspective. But here we also bring forth now our legal expertise, wherein I myself was part of close to a decade with a law firm, and we intend to now bring to our client a full comprehensive range of services where we provide our legal expertise as well. So, on what type of issues can Red Court be approached to? Where it would be beneficial to approach to an appellate route, and which all matters can be represented through an association, trade bodies to the ministry? And does ministry have the statutory powers to hear such type of prayer or a plea? We will take up such type of issues as well in the near future. So yeah, that's it from my side. I think I have spoken over budgeted my quota of speaking. Happy to hear anything from the participants, and thank you all for participating.